Welcome everyone to our newest SDEC session. This session is in the tag management area, but it also has some crossover with folks who use Adobe Analytics. So we've invited folks from both of those channels. Today we're going to be talking about creating launch extensions, and I'm excited to welcome my coworker, Stewart Schilling, to present on this topic. Before I hand it over to Stu, two housekeeping items. If you have any problems during the webinar or need some technical help, feel free to ping me on the chat and I will do my best to see if we can help out. And then during the session, if you have questions for Stu, go ahead and put them in the Zoom Q&A area, and we will answer as many of those questions as we can in the Q&A area. Please try to avoid putting the questions that you have for Stu in chat, because I'm going to just bug you to put them in the Q&A area. That's where we can document all of them and make sure we cover them. So again, welcome. Thanks for joining, and I will hand it over to Stu. Stu, it's all yours.
All right. Thanks, Adam. I am Stu Schilling. I am a solutions architect at Search Discovery, and I'm the author and maintainer of a number of launch extensions, Data Layer Manager, Adobe Analytics Product String Builder, the SDI Toolkit, Master Property Manager, Apollo QAX, and a handful of others, some private within our client companies, and others still in development or not necessarily worth mentioning here. And I'm an all-around nice guy, so don't be afraid to ask a question or two as we get into this. So I'm going to start with what are launch extensions. When we think about launch, launch is a rules engine, and it's controlled by extensions. So when we look in launch, everything is a rule or an extension or some part of an extension. And when we create a rule, we have events, we have conditions, and we have actions. And then within the configurations of these things, we also have data elements. Extensions are the thing that provides those things. So extensions provide events. They provide the conditions, actions, data elements that launch is using within its rules. If we load up a brand new property in launch, we are going to get the core extension. So from its core, launch is built as that rules engine with at least that one extension. Digging into each of these topics, so extensions provide events. So when it sees something, it says something. So seeing something, that's detecting things that are happening on a browser. Example, a click, a focus, a load, a scroll event, a form event like input or submit or cancel. And when that extension sees the particular thing happening on the browser that it cares about, it provides an event to launch in the form of a trigger. So back in the launch rules editor, what is the event that will trigger this rule? That's what the extension provides. So example events provided by the core extension, the focus event, the submit event on a form, library loaded, or media played. Extensions also provide conditions. So these are saying only fire this triggered rule if certain things are true. And so we can use this extension to narrow down when a rule will actually execute. Core extension is providing a cookie value condition. So if this cookie value has a certain value, if the cookie has a certain value, then return true. If you're within a certain date range, or if you're on a certain type of device, or maybe the web page that you're on has a specific domain value, www.mysite.com. These are ways that, yes, you can add conditions to the triggered rule. Extensions provide actions. So these are the things that the rule will do. So what does the rule execute when it's triggered and all conditions are met? Example of actions provided by the Adobe Analytics extension, which you're probably pretty familiar with. Clear variables, set variables, send beacon. And finally, extensions provide data elements. And these are the methods for accessing data at runtime. And examples of data elements are a cookie value data element. Retrieve the value of this cookie. Custom JavaScript, which can do anything that you can do in JavaScript and return some value that you can use within your rules, conditions, etc. DOM attributes, query string arguments, and the list goes on and on. But just to give you an idea of what are these things and what do they look like. So many extensions exist today. We start with the core extension, and then there are, I don't even know, maybe 100, maybe more extensions that are out there that have been built by both Adobe and users of Launch and vendors, and they're out there to provide that extended functionality within Launch for things that they feel are useful for you to do. So that list of extensions is always growing. But if you have something that you need to do and there's not an extension that does it, you can go ahead and you can build your own. So here's a hypothetical. So let's say that a stakeholder in your business comes to you and says, I want to know how often my users are highlighting and copying text on my site. I want to know what text is being selected. I want to know how many words are selected and how often the selected or copied text contains a string such as goat. I created this scenario because it's something that doesn't exist, so there's nothing out there, to my knowledge, that would allow you to easily implement against this business requirement. And so this is the framework of what we're going to talk about building as a custom extension in Launch. So from that business requirement, we can draw out an extension blueprint. So we can say, all right, what does this extension need to provide to Launch? And back to the text, I want to know how often my users are highlighting and copying text. So we need an event that detects when text is selected on the site. We need an event that will detect when text is copied on the site. I want to know how often the selected or copied text contains goat. So we need a condition, and this condition will return true if the selected text contains a term such as goat. And we're not going to make an extension that only detects goat. We'll make an extension that you can put in what you want. And you could look for pig, or you could look for cow, or whatever piece of text is most important to you. What else? We need to know how many words are selected, and we need to know what text is being selected. So those are data elements. So our extension is going to have to provide a data element type that returns the selected text, and it will have to return have a data element that will return the word count of the selected text. And then finally, what action do we want to do? So based on this business requirement, it's kind of amorphous. We don't really know, but we're in an Adobe shop, let's say, and we're going to send this data into Adobe Analytics. So action is going to send the above to Adobe Analytics. And I'll tell you right away that our extension, this action exists. So we have this on the Adobe Analytics extension, so we're not going to build it into our custom extension. So jumping in, and this is kind of getting into the technical side of building an extension. The most important part of an extension is its manifest, and it has the name extension.json. So this is going to be within the project that where you're building the extension. And it describes the extension, its events, conditions, actions, data elements, and any number of other things about this extension as it lives within the Adobe Launch ecosystem. At the top here is information about the extension itself. So what's my display name? What's my technical name for the extension? What platform is it for? And right now there's web, mobile, and soon will be edge. What is the version of the extension? A description that'll show up when you look at the extension in the catalog or when you install it onto your launch property. And then who's the author, and on and on. Also, we look at what events, what conditions, what data elements does this extension provide. And so based on our blueprint, we know we need to provide 2 events. And so this first event, display name, is going to be text selected. The technical name is text-selected. Schema defines what settings go along with that event. And in this case, we have no settings for it. And then library path, or lib path, says, where do I find the module that implements this event? Text copied, same thing, and lib path goes to text copied.js within source lib events. An example of that module, so just so that this isn't so scary, this is the text selected module. And so for this event, this is the lib path pointing to this file, and it is simply saying document on mouse up. So when the user lifts the mouse button, if document.getSelection to string, so if this returns a value, then we will trigger this event. So we're going to trigger is telling Launch, hey, the text selected event happened. In the manifest, we have our condition, and just like the event, we have a lib path. So the lib path is what implements this at runtime. And here's our text selected text contains. So it has a little helper function that is going to say, does this piece of text we send into it have a certain keyword? And we just force those things to lowercase and then return either true or false if that piece of text exists, if that keyword exists in the selected text. And the module itself is going to return just the return value of this function. So we're passing in 2 things. Settings, that keyword. So settings is saying, hey, I am going to get keyword from this conditions settings. So within the Launch UI, when we configure this condition, we will say settings.keyword is equal to something. And in this case, we'll say it's equal to GOAT. So GOAT is going to be the resolved value passed in here. Whoops. And then document.getSelection.toString, this is the selected text. The other part of this condition, because we said we're going to have this configurable within the UI, is this view path. So this is a piece of HTML and a little bit of JavaScript that allows us to capture that piece of information from the user. So there's a simple form on this HTML document, and it has a label of selected text contains and an input field that's identified by the name keyword. So this is just going to be a text input field, and the rest of the JavaScript in this file acts to either persist that information into the extension settings or to retrieve that information from settings to put it into the UI when you go to edit the condition. So if you had typed GOAT and then saved and came back, you'll be assured that GOAT is still there for you. Finally, our 2 data elements. These also live in libpath, source lib data elements. And we have word count.js and selected text.js. Display name for this data element is word count. The display name for this one is selected text. So we're going to see these in the user interface. Fingers crossed that we get there. Word count JS is pretty simple. We have a helper function that just gives us the word count of any string. And here we say if the document, basically if we have text to evaluate, we're going to return get word count for that text. And then selected text is simply going to return whatever text was selected. So having said that, extension code, it's developed locally. So you have this project on your machine, you're doing your development, and then it is packaged. So we pack up our project, we put it into a zip file, and then we upload it to Launch. I'm just going to jump out of here really quickly to give you a visual of that. We've talked about the project in the slides, but here's kind of a view of the project. So here's the extension JSON that we talked about. It is a 60-line file. And then we have source lib conditions, source lib data elements, source lib events. And those are the two events that we talked about. We also have source view conditions, and this is the HTML form and then the JavaScript that is run when the extension shows up in the Launch editing environment. So when we package it, all of this stuff gets packed up into this zip file here. And then when we upload it, we are basically saying, I want to send this thing up to Adobe Launch. So packaging, we use this command line npx add Adobe Raptor Packager. And then uploading, we copy, oops, there we go. We're copying the local extension package up to Launch. And the command line for that is npx add Adobe Reactor Uploader. This requires that you have established an Adobe I/O project, and that's the way that we communicate with Launch from our local machine. It's basically making API calls up to the Launch server to accomplish much of the things that we're trying to do. And I have found that rather than doing this directly from the command line, I wrap this command into a shell script that keeps me from having to type in anything other than npm run upload, which checks to see if a package exists, warns me if it doesn't, and then executes the upload command through Reactor Uploader. And finally, so at this point, let's say that we have done our first upload of the extension. We developed it locally, we packaged it, we uploaded it. The extension is going to exist in Launch in a development mode. And what that means is that the extension will be available only within my company and only within Launch properties that are configured for extension development. I'm just going to check here and see if Adobe is, oh, we're still having an issue. I'm going to see if I can log into Launch. So just as you might expect, Adobe is going to go down at the worst possible time for this presentation. And earlier this morning, ooh, I might be getting in. I might be getting in. Oh, big bucks. Good. So we have this property, SDEC extension dev. And when I created the property, I went into advanced settings and I clicked this button that says configure for extension development. And what that does is it makes this extension, or I'm sorry, this property a extension development property, and it allows me to see my extension that I just uploaded. If I come into this property, we're going to see that, hey, we have, and I did this ahead of time, but we have our extension already installed, and this will not be available to anyone who is not within my company and also running an extension development launch property. So let's see, release private, we have not done that yet, release public. So let's say that I have uploaded, I'm happy with what I've got, I want to go to the next step, and that would be release private. So if I want, I can run npx at Adobe Reactor Releaser, and what this will do is it will move my extension that I have uploaded as a development extension, it will move it as into a company private extension. And what that will do is it will make the extension available to anyone within my company on non-development properties. And that is a way that you can, create an extension and have it available to any of your properties. If you want to make this extension available to the world of launch users, then you finally do a release public. So your extension that has been developed, packaged, uploaded, released private can now be released publicly by going to a request form that goes to Launch Product Management, and they do a set of checks and evaluations on the extension to see that it is, fits all the compliance checkboxes that they have, and then they will make it available as a public extension in the public extension catalog. And my tip on this is just please consider the responsibility that comes with owning and maintaining a public extension. If you put something out there and just don't maintain it, or if it's full of bugs, it's really not helping the community in any way. So before anything goes down, I'm just going to do a little demo. So the extension that we talked about and walked through, we're going to use on this 7Goats site. And what I want to be able to do is say, hey, that was a text selection event. That was a text selection event. This would be selection, and then copy and satisfy all those requirements that we're given. So I'm going to go first into my data elements and create a new data element. I'm going to call it word count. And the extension is going to be SDEC example. And the data element type is word count. So you just saw the code for that. No configuration necessary. And we'll save. I'm going to add one more. And this one is going to be selected text. Select my extension. Select the data element type. And save. So now let's go ahead and create a rule. So this rule is going to be text was selected. And my event is going to come from this extension, which we created and uploaded. And text selected is going to be my event type. Again, no configuration is necessary. What do I want to do when this text is selected? Well, this is where I said we're going to use the Adobe Analytics extension. Let's do some set variables. And let's set eval1 to, eval1 to the data element selected text. And let's set eval2 to the data element word count. And let's set event 1 to indicate that text was selected and keep those changes. Now let's go ahead and send that beacon. So Adobe Analytics, send beacon, we'll make it an s.tl, and we'll say text selected, and keep changes there. And then finally, just to be a good citizen, we're going to do a clear vars to clean up things after we've done our send. So we'll save that. Let's go into our library, and let's add all those changed resources. So our data elements and our rule, and we will build this. And so we're building Launch library that now includes our new extension, includes 2 data elements, includes 1 rule. If we refresh this page, let's actually turn on debugging and refresh this page. And let's see here. So there we go. Our rule text selected was fired. So that was triggered by our new event. And here is the action. Text selected is the custom link value. evar1 is provided by the data element selected text. evar2 is provided by the data element word count. So now let's say, okay, 7 goats. Seems to be working. So now let's add our condition in here. So that was the only thing we didn't do. So let's change this rule just a bit. And let's say I only want this rule to fire when my selected text contains goat. Keep those changes, save to library, and build. And we're building, and we're building, and we're building. Back to our site, refresh the site. And if we're working, if we did it right, there we go. Condition selected text contained for rule text was selected was not met. You call these goats. There we go. And selection is poor. Does not satisfy what this one does. So that's, well, actually we did one more thing. We said we would do copy, text copied. So I'm just going to copy this rule. And I'm going to say text was copied. And I'm going to change to this other event, keep changes. And on set variables, I'm going to use a different event to indicate that text was copied. We'll use event 100. Keep changes, save to library. So the expectation is that now we can detect text copied, and it will only fire the rule or execute the rule fully. Did I build that? Did not. It'll only execute the rule and send a beacon if the text copied contains goat. So let's try it out. So these are the worst goats ever. And this is text selected. So now let's try copy. Here's our event 100. I didn't change the link name. I should have. But there is that. And then let's just do this without goat. And we'll try to copy that. And again, our condition is functioning as we would expect. So jumping back in, resources. So beyond what we showed here, the extension developer docs can be found out here on developer.adobelaunch.com and extensions. And within here, there's guides, there's a quick start, there's reference to all the stuff that you can do within extensions. Really good to just kind of peruse to see, what's out there, what's capable, or what are extensions capable of doing. And then finally, a submission process to creating your extension, creating the exchange listing if you're going to go public, testing, and then finally the release link, which is kind of in my bookmarks because I never remember where this public release request form is. It's right here. The other thing as a resource that I think is worth pointing out is the Launch Developer Slack. So this is a Slack channel, and it's developed, or it's dedicated to launch development, so technical stuff, APIs, general questions, and web extensions. This is everything to do with building and maintaining launch extensions. And the engineers and the product management at Adobe is very active here. You can fire off a question and get a response in minutes. And it's a great community and a great resource. So this link here will get you Adobe Launch. It's actually, you can get to it here. So once you've got to this developer.adobelaunch.com resources, right here, please join us. So this will take you to the form that will get you into that form. And what else do we have? Stuff that's not covered, I didn't talk about. Extension main is another thing that an extension can provide. It's basically a piece of code that runs when that extension is initialized. Think of it as happening kind of before library load. And then the functionality of the core modules that are built into Turbine or the Launch rules engine, stuff that you can access without having to reinvent the wheel, using shared modules such as the Adobe Analytics Tracker, Get Tracker module or Augment Tracker module. So interacting with other extensions that are providing modules for your use. And the Reactor Scaffolder, which is a way of starting up your extension from scratch. It's kind of a wizard sort of thing that will ask you what, does this extension have events? Does this extension have conditions? Does it have data elements? And so on and so forth. And then the Sandbox, which is a local environment that you can use to test out the UI and certain functionalities of your extension before you choose to upload it into a development environment. Lots of stuff. Like you could go for probably 20 hours of a class building extensions and getting into the nitty-gritty, but hopefully this gave you a good overview of what an extension looks like, what things are involved in the thought process of building one, and yeah, just a little peek under the covers. So I will open it for questions at this point.
Awesome. Thank you much. Thanks so much, Stu. That was really cool. I love when we get to actually see live demos of stuff. So let me shout out some of the questions that we have here. So in your particular scenario, and this may have been answered already, but someone had asked, is the selected text contains view form HTML standalone or part of some UI in Launch? I'm guessing you're going to cover this later, so you may have covered that.
It is a modern capability of, modern browsers should be supporting this. So here, like this, if I simply, put this into my browser console, it's just telling me, hey, what was selected. So If I take the toString off, you'll see the whole object, which tells you all sorts of stuff, including like the offset within the element. So this was, let me open that up. This selected text was 52 characters into this element, and it ended at character 67. You can, crawl the DOM from here to say what element was it, and so you could actually go deeper and provide further context to say, hey, this text was selected within this item, within this area, within this subsection of the page, and do some really cool stuff. So yeah, nothing too magical about that, and you can go to MDN to check that out.
Okay, so we had two questions, just to knock them out really quickly, is asking what editor and development environment you are using and what tool you're using to code. So let's just get rid of that one quickly.
Yeah, so I am using VS Code. So this is Visual Studio Code. I am still somewhat addicted to Atom, and so I often have both up and Atom for kind of my clipboard of things, and then I do most of my work in VS Code.
Okay, so is there a more user-friendly way of testing extension changes? Right now, the whole uploading, providing private keys, and then building takes about 1 to 3 minutes each time. And the preview tool that the Reactor library provides is too basic. I need to be able to test things on the real site.
Yep. So that's where the scripting really comes in handy. So here's my upload script. I sort of redacted it when I was in the presentation, but my key file, so this is in my home directory, keys, and then this is my private key. This extension version, extension name, it all comes from the extension JSON. So it's reading extension JSON to basically create the name of the package file. And then this could be npx at Adobe Reactor Uploader. I am short-circuiting, so I'm going straight to node modules, so I don't have to download it every time. But just to give you an idea of what it takes to get this thing uploaded, let me just reset so that so npm run upload, and so it's just packaged, and then it's doing the upload. So your 1 to 3 minutes was just changed to 10 seconds. So you can definitely go pretty close to iterative development. Having uploaded those changes, I do need to go to my property. I do need to do a build in order for those changes of the extension to be reflected within Launch. What's next?
Okay, cool. So the next one is Search Discovery working on or thought of building an extension that would track custom events and send the data to multiple analytics tools, for example, Adobe Analytics and Heap?
We are not working on that. I think I understand the motivation, and I think that what we would see is that we would have an extension for Heap, which would have the actions that would do the whatever pre-work was necessary, and then doing the send to Heap. We are working on software that will allow you to use a single data layer, which is defined, and you've probably heard of Apollo, which is our flagship product that we've been developing. This will allow you to build once, so work from a single data layer, and then syndicate information into things like Adobe Analytics, Adobe Platform, Google Analytics, Heap, or any number of other destinations, including third-party vendors.
Okay, cool. And someone had asked, can you use modern JavaScript syntax in your dependencies, such as arrow functions and the spread operator?
Yeah. So the answer to that is yes and no, and yes and no. The question really is, can we use ES6, fat arrow functions, syntactical sugar, and spread operators, and all that great stuff, async await. And if you are, it comes down to browser compatibility. And so when we looked at the two sides of the condition, we saw that one side was in lib and one side was in view. So this is the form that runs within Launch, and this is the part that is going to get built into the client library, or the Launch built library, and run on any browser that accesses your site. And so because this is going to go out to any user, we need to be cross-browser compatible, and we need to stay away from anything that is not going to run on your lowest supported browser. So if you're still out there and you're supporting, IE9, you're going to have to take into consideration the code that you're putting into this, this library. Also, this code is going to be bundled by Launch when it builds. So when it takes this extension, when it builds the Launch library, it's going to bundle it. So right now, this needs to be ES5. So you need to stay away from those things. There's a change coming where they're actually going to do a transpiler. I know that's for Edge. It may also be happening for the web extensions as well. So having said that, this stuff, anything in lib, you want to be pretty plain Jane JavaScript, just so that it's going to be supported by any browser that wants to run it. Within Vue, this is stuff that is running within the Launch environment. So Vue is running here and here. So you can do whatever you want here because you have more control. So, and one thing we didn't cover was, hey, what do I use as a framework here? I just use straight HTML, but you can use anything you want. So you can use React, and you can use Angular, you could use Vue, you could use whatever framework for front-end dev you want to use here. So you could create a single-page app within an extension view that does what you need it to do. I think I covered that.
Okay, so one person had asked whether or not we might be able to have a session in the future that is more of a introduction to Adobe Launch for beginners. So that's something we can definitely think about. And then we had a couple folks asking if the slides that you shared would be made available. Normally we share just the recording, but Stu, we can talk about that. And if you're happy to share the slides, we can put that in the Slack group as well.
Yeah, and I would say if there's anything in particular that you want from the slides or any follow-up questions, do contact me. You can hit me directly in SDEC Slack, or you can hit me up in the Launch Developer Slack. And I'm happy to give you code snippets or answer any follow-on questions you have.
Okay, well, we are out of time. We had a couple more technical, detailed questions. I think I might connect, Lucas had a couple questions, so I might just have you and Lucas and Stu just chat. But thank you so much, Stu, for this awesome presentation. And the recording will be posted in the SDEC Slack group later today. If you don't have access to the SDE Slack group, you're really missing out because we have about 70% of the group is in the Slack group, but 30% of you are not getting to see all of these wonderful recordings that we've had. So if you have any problems or need help getting into the SDEC Slack group, please email me at sdec@searchdiscovery.com, and I will make sure that you can get into the Slack group. So again, Stu, thank you so much.
You are more than welcome. Happy to contribute.